And Tom has a cartoon today about managing uncertainty. He said, we need an update. We need to update our forecast. Heads, this will blow over soon. Tails, it's the end of the world. Well, I don't think it's the end of the world, but the implications could be interesting, right? I thought back to some of the times that I've been in business. In 1987, I had just started a new business, which became Miglash Marketing, the week before the big stock market crash. I was in New Orleans, and I remember seeing Time Magazine basically saying this is the Great Depression and this is the end of the world as we know it. Okay, which didn't really happen in '87. It was a little bumpy, but fortunately, I had some good clients, and the agency I was working within had grocery stores and things, which people still have to eat. So I found out that fundamentals still apply. I remember in 2001, 9/11, I had a client that sold artistic supplies, and the phones absolutely went dead. The artists stopped buying completely. They didn't call. They were devastated. On the other hand, I also had Baseball Express as a client, and their sales went up directly in the aftermath of 9/11. We were able to take a client that had been steadily shrinking for decades and grow them 20% in the aftermath of 9/11, which was a recession. And we grew them 20% or helped them grow 20% that year, the next year, and the next year, and got to be somewhat of a celebrity with the Smith Gardner Company because they said our clients tended to grow through the recession, whereas most everybody else was shrinking. One of the reasons is that our modeling system is about growth. It's not about making up the cost of the modeling by eliminating the waste. One of the prominent consulting firms told one of my prospective clients it's impossible to grow both both have growth and profit increase at the same time. And so they advocated cutting dramatically the mailings when the company was somewhat in trouble. That unfortunately raises the overhead and creates all sorts of other problems. As Dick Cabela told me, I showed him how you could cut 5% or you could cut 20% of the circulation and only cut 5% of the sales. He said, I don't want to cut sales. Good old Dick Cabela. He said, show me how to grow sales. Don't show me how to cut sales. And that was, Dick certainly was no statistician, but he was excellent at wisdom. And I probably learned as much from Dick Cabela as I did from anybody I've ever worked with. Very, very good, solid wisdom guy. So in 2008, um, we we were working very, very closely with Musician's Friend, and normally we look at seasonality as a modeling factor. So we model last year's results to determine what we're going to do this year. The trouble is that when the seas are very, very rough and the wind keeps changing direction, it's no good saying, "Gee, last year it was calm seas when we sailed through here." That doesn't help you. And so we developed a different technique with an accelerated time frame so that we were modeling very, very quickly. But our system gives you a really good picture of geodemographics and trends around the country. You wouldn't think musical instruments are one of the necessities of life in an economic crisis, and yet we were able to keep the circulation consistent, keep hitting the sales targets, um, mostly by letting the market tell us where to mail and to do it on a relatively short time window. So there's a lot of things that you can do. There may be other markets that you haven't discovered. That's kind of what happened with Pet Edge, one of our clients back after 9/11. That one that we grew some 60%. There's definitely techniques but I would also recommend getting with someone who's been through it a few times. You know, for most millennials, this will be their first real crisis while at work, and even more so Gen Z. You know, the kids today don't even they weren't even alive. Um, you know, 9/11 was 19 years ago. So, you know, you may be reporting to somebody who has no recollection of 9/11 whatsoever, and it's important to be sensitive to that also. Uh, Tom Fishburne has some wisdom here, and he says the worst thing to do in a time of chaos is add to it. And I think having some kind of steady hand at the tiller is a good answer. Now is probably not the time to say, "Oh, we've spent 40 years as a catalog company. We're going to ditch all that and we're going to go digital." And part of the reason is that when you make a move like that, all of your bearings, all of your benchmarks, all of your metrics get thrown away. So you don't know whether it's working or not working. What you really want to do is find something with high engagement that is understandable, that you can use as a barometer to tell what's going on in the rest of the world. And that's what we've done. And I think it's very, very sound what Tom is saying here. Um, when you're in a world of uncertainty, try to make decisions. Try not to just stop. That's a really important point. Now, on that note, I thought it was really an interesting. Here's an interesting point that this company developed. There's a couple of these companies, so I'm not sure exactly which is which. One is called Slightly Robots, and it developed a product to keep people from or to help them stop pulling their hair out. I've heard that this is is a thing. I have always had trouble keeping my fingernails groomed properly. So, I may want to get one of these, but the bottom line is we're not supposed to be touching our face because you pick up the virus on surfaces, and then when you touch your face, you get it. That's pretty much what they think is the way it spreads. And so this device you wear on your wrist, and it vibrates when you get you know when you get near your face. They also recommend shaving your beards if you're a man, so I may have to do that. My wife wants me to do it anyway. She says I'll look much younger. Okay, there's a couple of side benefits, not many. We'll see. So here's a product that's come out of the blue that helps you manage to do what you're supposed to do. Interesting article uh, about working from home. Basically, what it says is that some people are ill prepared to do it. They've always been in an office. IBM pioneered it in the 70s, I think, and late 70s, and they reversed course dramatically just a few years ago, like 3 years ago, saying that you got to come in. Yahoo reversed course, saying you got to come in. I think this is going to flip the switch the other direction. So if you've never worked from home, I encourage you to research it a bit. Tend, I have a deadline every day to get out, to get up and get started, and also tend to have a curfew time when I stop, no matter what. And I think both of those are pretty simple but important things. And try to get up and walk. And also for the coronavirus, get outside, get some vitamin D, walk in the sun, take some deep breaths. That's important too. Now, I have a very private office, so I tend to go to that office, but I'm somewhat capable of working from home. So that was some good thoughts on the ad week. Um, there was one other really good article I wanted to talk about, which is this one comes from Which50.com. Is a marketing magazine in Australia, and every now and then they have really something very, very well written and very clear. And this is about 4 distinct methods of measuring your marketing, and it's really from Gartner, um, and that's where this is a summarization of that, and I'm going to summarize it. Um, they talked about marketing mix modeling, which is time series aggregates, um, and it aggregates media spend. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to line up the response curve. The trouble is, in the old days, this worked really well with cataloging. We'd drop a catalog, and the the orders would shoot up, and then they would decay down, and that was that worked really well. And but then as you made more drops, um, I remember hearing the story from Jack Miller of Quill Corporation. He said in the late 70s, inflation was 20% a year or something. So prices were changing monthly, and we we had a big book, an annual book, and we couldn't keep our margins in line because the vendors would be changing the prices and we would still be producing the catalog. So he said we decided to go to monthly mailings, and we thought that would alienate our customers, that they wouldn't, they were used to getting one catalog or two a year, and now we're going to mail them every month. And he said that just took off. That was the main, again, it was a response to a crisis. It was a response to runaway inflation. I remember one of my first jobs I had in charge of marketing when we'd send out catalogs. We had stamps. All prices have increased by 10%. All prices have increased by 20% on these vendor catalogs that we would send out. So I remember those days. But he said what happened was Quill went from a supplier of last resorts for businesses to a supplier of first choice because we were there more often. We were knocking on the door more often, and the business took off as a response to a crisis. It's really important to remember these things, okay? But anyway, but I actually developed a technique because I developed a lot of simple tools in the early days of spreadsheets. And I developed one where we could overlay the multiple curves and see what was going on and sort of discern what was happening. But today it's really difficult because there he goes, touching his face again. It's really difficult because there's so much going on. You're doing daily emails, and you're doing specials, and you might be doing banner ads, and you might be doing closed garden ads to your customers, and all kinds of stuff is going on. It's very, very difficult to make this work because so much is going on. This one I think is even more difficult, multi-touch attribution. It really is vendor dependent. You have to trust the vendor, and the difficulty is it says it's depending on the available data and provider. You're trying to track an individual's path to conversion across multiple touch points. And my question always is, do you remember the multiple touch points for yourself? Could you track yourself? Knowing all you know about you, can you remember how you got to the purchase point? I mean, in some cases, I used to get Paul Frederick's catalog, and I also knew that they would do special offers in the email. And so when the catalog came, I'd, either set it aside or look at it, but then I would wait for one of those specials, or I'd fly in an airline magazine and I'd find an ad there for a new customer offer, even though I wasn't a new customer. And so I kind of manipulated their system. And so I could remember what was going on. But beyond that, really hard to know what my own path is. And the main difficulty is that my driver for Paul Frederick was the catalog. That prompted me to think about, do I need some more menswear? And yet, the trigger, the main cause was the catalog, but the trigger point was an email special. Now, who gets credit? That's the tricky part. Most people would say, oh, it's the email that drove it. Yeah, but if you just did email and eliminated the catalog, what would the impact be then? Then I wouldn't even be thinking about it or watching for your email. Probably wouldn't have any impact whatsoever. And that brings us to holdout testing. Holdout testing, which I am a huge advocate of, says, okay, let's try it. Let's mail some people and not mail others. The problem with holdout testing is it, it, it has a hard time getting traction in digital because when you don't advertise, when there's low engagement, people don't even notice it's missing. People may not notice it's happening, but they don't notice it's missing either. And so you have to hold out a lot to see any change happen. Whereas with mail and especially with catalogs, we do this all the time. We say, okay, we're going to mail 300,000 pieces, and then we're going to hold out 30,000 pieces, and see how the downstream volume goes. Very, very easy. It's kind of a variant on that prior one, where we're trying to measure it right after the drops happen. Um, it's very powerful. It can tell you the ROI on mail, and it can basically isolate the mail impact in a sea of omni-channel marketing. But it's very, very difficult with the other ones. Okay, and lastly, we've got a unified measurement approach, and this is kind of, let's take a little of each. Let's not do any of these in isolation. So it's not very illuminating, to be honest. Mark used several of these methods because each provides unique insights. Yes, holdout testing is great for justifying a catalog, but it's not that great for telling what what is happening inside that. For that, you need other techniques, and we're covering these in our Target Tuesday. So I would encourage you to to chase that down on. I think there's a playlist actually on my YouTube channel. So if you want to hear more about testing and direct marketing, I encourage you to go to YouTube. Miglosh Marketing on YouTube.com will get you the playlist for direct marketing and testing. So, what to do in a crisis? One good thing, find somebody who's been through it and has some ideas on how they did it. I highly encourage that. I'm John Miglosh. Like and share. Your friends will think you're smart. Bye bye.